Yo, what do you think about the new iPad Pro Apple just released? Oh, you mean the I want to be a real computer so bad iPad Pro? Yeah, I heard of it. What do you mean? Apple never said it was a computer in the first place. Yeah, sure. Then what do they mean by your next computer is not a real computer? That sentence is all kinds of weird. I still don't understand what that sentence actually means. Now, Apple decided to add the same M1 chip in the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air into the iPad Pro. I mean, who asked for that? Like, why? Yeah, to make the apps run faster. Duh. Yeah, sure. The apps was great already. In fact, the previous iPad Pro already the fastest tablet in the market already. See, I don't really like anytime all these companies try to make something that is already working perfectly and they say something like, oh yeah, we're trying to make it faster. At the end of the day, it's only going to make them look good on the stage. It does not really matter in the real world. I mean, they go on stage, they be like, yeah, we added this new chip and it's 30% faster, it's 40% faster. Real life people are not going to notice that difference. And that is why all their devices look and perform the same as their previous generation. And for the most part, I feel like the iPad Pro just have more than enough power than it actually needs. That is just my opinion. I think you might be right. Hey guys, this is the all new M1 iPad Pro and I'm really excited because this is my first unboxing of an iPad. Now, if you've unboxed an iPad before, this will be the same experience as previous iPads because there's nothing really new here, at least on the outside. So let's see what comes in the box. So obviously the iPad Pro itself is the first thing you're going to see in the box. I was kind of expecting it to be a little bit heavier, but this thing is actually very thin and very light. I feel like I'm holding a very expensive cardboard paper right now. This thing is actually very, very thin. Now let's see what else comes in the box. Obviously you're gonna get the manuals. Nobody reads that. You also get 2 Apple stickers. I don't really use that too. Anyways, you also get a USB-C cable. I really love the fact that the iPad Pro charges with USB-C. Now Apple, please do the same for the iPhone. Anyways, you also get a charging brick. I was kind of expecting a bigger brick because this seems like the same brick you get in an iPhone 12. For some reason, I was kind of expecting it to be like the same brick you get in at least the MacBook Air or something like that, but it is what it is. And that's it for what comes in the box. Like I said, there's nothing really new here if you've unboxed an iPad Pro before. But before I end this video, I just want to say something real quick about the iPad Pro, something like a first impression and a quick review of the iPad Pro. So let's get to it. Hey guys, Teflex. So by the time you'll be watching this video, I will have been using the iPad Pro for like 3 days plus now. So here are my thoughts for both first-time buyers and people who already own a previous generation iPad Pro. Now I'm just gonna go straight to the point. People who already own a previous generation iPad Pro, like the one that came out in 2018 or 2020, this is not an upgrade and I don't need to use the previous generation. In fact, this is actually my first iPad and I can say to you straight away that this is not an upgrade. But if you're still curious about the iPad Pro, you can continue to watch this video and I'm going to appreciate that anyways. So let's start with the build quality of the iPad Pro. The iPad Pro has the same design as the previous generation iPads with a slim boxy design with rounded off edges. And the body is also made out of aluminum, which makes it almost fingerprint resistant. And I said almost fingerprint resistant because if your hands are dry, it's almost impossible to put fingerprints on the iPad Pro. But if you have wet hands like mine, as you can see, there are marks of my hand at the back of the iPad Pro. Anyways, the iPad Pro also has 4 speakers, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, and they sound really quality. In fact, it's one of the few fantastic features about the iPad Pro that I noticed, apart from the fact that it's very light and very slim, because I was expecting it to be a little bit heavier for some reason. But I played a video on YouTube and the sound on this iPad is so immersive. This is what it sounds like. Take a listen to that. Now, one thing I also appreciate about the iPad Pro is that it charges with USB-C. But one thing I also noticed is that it doesn't have an headphone jack. And I don't think an headphone jack can actually fit anywhere on the iPad Pro because the iPad Pro is actually very straight. Now, as for the durability of the iPad Pro, I had no plans on trying to bend my iPad Pro or slamming it on the ground or throwing it off a building or something like that. But when the nature had a different plan for me, I was actually shooting a video of the iPad Pro on the Brooklyn Bridge or something, and a strong breeze just blew past. But fortunately, there's no scratch or crack, so I guess that's the free Mother Nature durability test of the iPad Pro. By the way, just in case if you're wondering, this is the 11-inch variant of the iPad Pro. The display on this iPad is actually an OLED display which can go up to 120 Hz. It's actually going to be interesting to test the gaming abilities of this iPad. I've actually never really played games on the iPad, so I'm going to be dropping a video concerning gaming on the iPad, maybe with a PS5 controller or something like that. So if you want to see that, you might want to consider subscribing. That's actually going to be very interesting. Anyways, like I said, it's an OLED display, which means the black levels are very deep. It produces very sharp, detailed, high contrasty color. I mean, by now everybody knows about OLED display. I mean, if you're a fan of technology, you probably have heard OLED a million times. Now, one thing I noticed when watching content on YouTube is that you actually get thick black bars at the top and at the bottom. So I went on Netflix to actually confirm if that's how it is for the iPad in general, the thick black bars, but you're not gonna get any thick black bars on Netflix. So I guess it kind of depends on the application you use for consuming content. If you're watching content on YouTube, you're gonna get the thick black bars, but on Netflix, well, on Netflix it also depends on the aspect ratio of the movie itself. Now, let's talk about the iPad OS real quick. Over the past few days that I've been using the iPad Pro, I've come to realize that iPad OS is pretty much iOS for a bigger screen, which is kind of sad because I was expecting iPad OS to stand out. But for the most part, almost like 99.999999% of everything that is on iPad OS is pretty much iOS. Like the gestures are the same thing, the slide down menus are the same thing, everything is just the same thing. Which is kind of weird because I was expecting something different, something that's going to make the iPad stand out from the MacBook and from the iPhone. It makes the iPad Pro feel like my iPhone 12 just with a bigger screen. And one thing I noticed is that even not all the apps are actually fully supported on the iPad Pro. Apps like Instagram, Snapchat, Coinbase, they don't occupy the whole screen, which I find to be very, very weird. But anyway, so far I'm not really impressed with iPad OS, and for the most part I feel like iPad OS is going to be the one to slow down the potential of the iPad Pro, because the iPad Pro has amazing hardware. And speaking of hardware, the iPad Pro has a dual camera setup, probably the same thing with the iPhone 12. Nothing really special. It takes regular iPhone pictures, which are amazing, but I don't think anyone's going to be getting an iPad Pro just to take pictures. And if you do, well, please don't. Anyways, also speaking of hardware, the new iPad Pro is now powered by the M1 chip, the same chip you're going to find in the M1 MacBook Pro and the M1 MacBook Air, which I find to be unnecessary, to be honest. And for the most part, I always feel like the iPad Pro has always been a device that has more power than it actually needs. I mean, the apps are going to run faster, but in my opinion, I don't feel like a faster processor is what the iPad Pro needs right now. In fact, the previous generation iPad Pro haven't taken full advantage of the processor in them. The processor in the previous generation iPad Pro is an overkill. Now, adding M1 chip to the iPad Pro is overkill. It's just way too much power. In my opinion, I feel like Apple should have worked on iPad OS and try and make it better and make it stand out, because so far so good. I feel like the iPad OS is a very fantastic hardware. I mean, it has the same chip as the M1 MacBook Pro and the M1 MacBook Air, the M1 chip. By the way, if I'm very sure that most of you guys already watched a review of the M1 MacBook Pro and the M1 MacBook Air. The M1 MacBook Pro is a beast. So now that the iPad Pro has the same chip as the M1 MacBook Pro and the M1 MacBook Air, it should automatically mean that the iPad Pro is a beast, right? Well, not really. I mean, it's close, but I'm not really getting a beast vibe with this thing. I mean, the hardware is great, but the iPad OS is just slowing everything down, like really, which is kind of odd because Apple has always been a company that they like to take full advantage of their hardware with software. Other Apple devices has good hardware but fantastic software, which is kind of the opposite of the iPad Pro. The iPad Pro has amazing hardware, like really amazing hardware, but the software is just That is my opinion on the iPad Pro. The iPad Pro is a computer-ish device, not really a computer. For the most part, what do I like about the iPad Pro? Well, like I said, the display. Watching content on the iPad Pro is super great. In fact, that's probably going to be the only use for the iPad Pro right now. Anyways, that's my opinion on the iPad Pro, M1 iPad Pro. Anyways, thanks for watching. It's been your boy, Levin. I will see you guys in my next video. Peace. Money line, I'ma run it.